at one point, it was almost as though Pune had more interesting theatre than Bombay. Because there was, Sudarshan Hall was really becoming a home to so much young talent, and there were other alternative spaces coming up. And I think that is still happening. I think that is still in evolution. There's some amazing talent here. And I think that there's a thirst from the audience. I think that's what, even places like this, to realize that there's a need for addas, for spaces where people can go. And that is, I think if there were more spaces like that developed and created across the city, the talent is there to fill them with wonderful work. But the problem is to find these spaces. I think that's the biggest challenge.
And another thing is, if you see a let's say Broadway theatre actors or celebrated, and they get paid well, they get the Broadway shows are massive, like they're big productions. That still hasn't happened. Like acting, theatre actor, still not a very big career.
Well, luckily we are in Maharashtra, where it's still still really of the highest caliber in terms of the commercial theatre in Maharashtra has it still has standing. It is still of repute. You can say you're a theatre actor, and in Maharashtra people won't say ki acha par karte kya ho. If you say you're a film actor in Maharashtra, though even that is changing now with your new cinema in Marathi, which is wonderful, but this is possibly the only state in the country where theatre is still regarded as something, but yet parallel theatre isn't. And of course, the finesse and the professionalism and the quality of what West End or Broadway have to offer is very far away from that. And I think, really the big thing to remember is that formal theatre in an auditorium is about 200 odd years old in this country, 250 years old. Very young. We have an unbroken tradition of 2,500-year-old, Puriyattam. But that is of a classical nature. We have traditional theatre, but the formal theatre in an auditorium is very young. Whereas in the West, it's much older, double the age or more than double the age. Shakespeare's 400 years, and before him there was ability to perform everywhere. So in little restaurants, little pubs, in people's garages, in people's homes, we have to have the ability to nurture that. If the government comes down and says, authorities come down and say, no, this license and that license and entertainment tax and wagera, it becomes prohibitive. So if the government
don't have a killer of people who can manage theatre, is it still the same? Is the condition still the same, or has it changed in so many years?
I sadly can't say it's changed, but I think that it will still take a few years. But I think that some things are changing. I think that in the big metros, especially in Delhi, in Bombay, in Bangalore, and in Pune, one sees that alternative spaces are opening up, like whether it's a space like this, or whether it's in somebody's home in their basement, or whether it's a gym that says every Sunday come and perform in our space. So there are more and more. If that is allowed to happen and allowed to generate, they will understand how to nurture that growth. It's still very tricky. There is, for instance, I'll tell you a story about a place in Delhi which was a design studio, and those were designers, and they said, we'll have one room where you can come and perform. But they had no idea how theatre functions. You can't suddenly start charging 15,000 bucks or 20,000 bucks or whatever, because that's not part of the reality of theatre.
Another thing about Delhi is like, have you heard about Kingdom of Dreams, the place? And Sanjna has been performing there for so many years now, and it's been really successful. So I think that is extremely encouraging to, I don't know, like cities, like other cities to adapt that model or.
Have you seen it?
I want to see it. My friend has seen it. It's not good.
I'd rather go and see a Hindi movie. I mean, I really doesn't capture the magic of performance, of live performance, of live engagement. It's very snazzy. A lot of people will spend huge amounts of money, and we have that ability today. You have an audience who has money in their pocket, and they will go and spend it. I've been to Kingdom of Dreams twice. Once I've seen that play, Sangal, whatever. And I've also seen circus performance from somewhere in Mongolia or China. But it's not what I think I think that's what's the problem. If we jump to trying to create that reality, which is the Broadway reality, without nurturing everything underneath, we're going to fall flat on our face. It's not a financial success. It has to give itself, it has to lease out its venues for corporate events, for shadis, for things like that. It's not, it's a hoax that it's doing well financially.
Okay.
So it's a big problem. It's like Singapore. Singapore made all these beautiful state-of-the-art theatre venues, and then they suddenly sat back and said, "Arey, but who's going to perform here?" They didn't have the talent, so they had to import talent. That's ridiculous. In India, what we have is the richness of so much talent, but we don't have the infrastructure and the buildings and the ability to perform. So it's ulta, and all we need is a change of mindset. We need more people thinking of management. We need people doing the work that I do, which is very unglamorous, but it's about seeding habits. It's about seeding a value of the engagement. It's places like this, and what I mean, this is a prime property. We're sitting in prime Pune property. You look at all the buildings around here. They could sell this and make huge amounts of money, but they haven't. They've decided to give it to a cultural center. It's extraordinary. You need more people like this in India to have this. Every municipal ward should have at least one space like this, and then we will have a real change. We need these spaces. It's about attitude, it's about approach, it's about what you want, you know. We don't need the big kingdom of dreams is great for some things, you know. You need the Jamshed Bhava theatres, the Tata theatres for some things, but they're not going to nurture anything. These are spaces that are going to nurture development and growth, and we need nurturing now. For another 10-15 years, we need on a mass scale across this country. And you know, they were talking about skills development, and that's pretty scary, but anyhow, it's a need. I think we need this kind of development in theatre. So whether it's developing skills for management or sound or lights, these are the skills that need to be developed as well. It's not only actors on stage. There are enough of those.
Another thing is, like, in another one of your interviews, you said that theatre is human intensive and expensive, so it needs a very strong financial model. Have you found that model?
I think there are what ideally it should have is government safety nets, which don't exist in the UK. You have the Arts Council, which is like the safety net. So in case you create something and there's a fiasco, you have a bounce back ability because the government will be there to support you. Here we still have a very, very prehistoric way of functioning with our central government schemes, which are incredibly feudal. They're from the whole Maibab patronage philosophy. They are not about nurturing and allowing things to grow. And I think things can grow. I think, as I said, the audience today has money in their pockets in urban India, and they can be enticed, I believe very strongly, to spend money on theatre. Because I don't think that cinema gives you the same thing at all. I think what joy and fulfillment and sense of community that theatre brings about in an audience is so powerful and so strong, which is maybe also why the government fears it.
I used to the Marathi theatre that was very good to evolve with the times. Why do you think that has been the case? Is it like the culture?
Well, I mean, both theatres are facing an enormous crisis.
Yes, yes.
Bengali theatre is virtually dead. They're going to hate me for saying this, but it is. The group theatre movement is dead. There are people struggling to do theatre even today, but there's a big challenge that they're facing that they're not able to grasp. Marathi commercial theatre is also going through a huge challenge, and nobody's stopping. And I have friends who are producers and directors in Marathi theatre, and they're saying that. They're saying nobody's stopping to say what is the problem. Let's study the problem and try and see what we need to do to make differences. And instead, the government is handing out production money for commercial theatre. The fact is that we have such diverse practice of theatre in this country. We have such richness. All of it doesn't get headline news. All of it doesn't get high polloi publicity. It works in various parts of the country. You go to Assam, you have mobile theatre. It's the most commercially viable theatre. It's unbelievable. And people in rural Assam pay 70 rupees, 100 rupees to buy a ticket. You go to Vidarbha region, you've got the Jaripatti theatre, which are the farmers who are either, I mean, this is from where people are committing suicide. They are performing, the farmers are creating theatre, their turnover is in crores, the audiences are paying for their theatre. So we don't even know, we're sitting in complete ignorance in our cities. And it's not as though that theatre can come and perform in Bombay. No. It has its meaning, it has its relevance, it's for that audience. It would be really out of place in a city like Bombay. But it needs us to recognize it. It needs us to celebrate it. It needs us to say, oh my God, look at what we have, such richness. So it's not only Tamasha that we have, or Darshavatar, we have a lot in Maharashtra alone, but we have a lot across the country. And I think that's what's exciting about theatre in India. You don't have this diversity in the rest of the world, and not even in America or the UK.
Another thing is like the last film was around Bombay, which
I don't know, was it?
yes, it was, and it was very well appreciated. But then you stopped doing movies. Do you miss acting sometimes? I mean, regret like leaving it? No, not at all.
Not at all. I actually realized when I went to school in New York, I went to drama school, and I realized that is what I love. I love the process of rehearsal. I love theatre for that reason, that it's about pulling people together and working through. It's not about just performing in front of a camera and then going away. That doesn't give me any thrill. I just love it. I can appreciate it. I can watch it, but it doesn't give me the high that theatre does. But I do miss theatre acting. I don't miss cinema. I do miss theatre acting, but next life.
It seems like you've taken over to the maternal side of your ancestry.
Well, Prithviraj Kapoor also at the peak of his film career created his theatre company. So theatre was there from both sides. You know, Raj Kapoor, Shami Kapoor and Shashi Kapoor all learned in theatre. And my dad would have continued working in theatre if it was a viable medium of income, and it just wasn't in those days. So perhaps if he was born today, he might have just been tied to theatre, but that was his love, his absolute love.
About the intolerance debate that is so going on, do you agree with artists?
I think it's incredibly important. I don't think we can wash it aside. I don't think we can brush it aside and say there are people who are out there to get publicity. I think that's really foolish. I think what's really scary, two things are really scary for me. One is the vitriolic response that one is hearing from people who are completely missing the point of what this symbolic action is. It's a symbol. It's not a end in itself, and they're missing the point of the argument. And so it's really scary to see how aggressive that response has been by a pretty large, group of people in our society who have suddenly found their voice through these wonderful mediums of television, of social media, all sorts of things. And the other, of course, is the wonderful silence that our government, all the great platitudes with which they've responded. And I'm not interested in hearing platitudes about tolerance or great communities. I think that very pointed statements have been made by the powers that be, and it's not a state issue, it's a national issue. So they've got it wrong. They've got it wrong completely. Their silence is complicit, and I hope that this country wakes up to that realization. And luckily, we're a democracy, and we can vote again and again and again.